I'm going to go ahead. Rachel and Andrew, can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got you.
All right. So I don't know if either one of you were part of the class that I did last month where we went through sections 1 through 12 of the contract. But today I'm actually starting at 13. I am for sure going to go back and do another class on the first half of the contract. But as always, anybody with any contract questions, pick up the phone, call me, call any of the mentors. But hopefully this will be enough so that you guys won't have to do that. But if you do, we're always available. Morning. All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and get started. So section 13, the cap conversation as well as inspections, this always creates interesting conversations. Just at the head of this, let's talk about exactly what the cap can cover before we talk about amount. The cap covers 4 separate situations. It covers anything that comes in under appraisal conditional repairs. It covers any issues that arise out of a moisture and termite inspection. It covers whatever might need to be done for well and septic. And it also covers what I think is very important is issues that arise out of the walkthrough. So we'll come back and go through each one of those. But as it states here on the contract, the cap is, well, we'll go right here. So this section here, what we would fill in traditionally, obviously it says it's blank, it's 1%. When it's a heavy duty seller's market, like it's been for the past couple of years, we are seeing people actually put in here as on the purchase agreement coming from the buyer that they're only asking the seller to be responsible up to a half cap or even a quarter cap. It takes kind of a lot of gumption to be able to say that because you really need to rely on what you're seeing when you're doing a showing. When something like that happens, but in situations where you're dealing with, I would say specifically condos, newer condos, even newer townhouses, there's a little bit less risk there in reducing the cap. But at the end of the day, if we want to keep it out of the seller's market, it's okay to leave this as 1%. If you're looking at a home that's older, that you can see some obvious situations, maybe even they've disclosed a moisture and or termite issue or a well and septic issue in the listing, you can certainly negotiate this up as well. So you can negotiate it up to 2, 2.5 to 3. I've even seen it go as high as. It might be something that needs to be negotiated back and forth a little bit, but you can certainly, if the house looks like it's going to have some pretty severe appraisal issues, that's where I would actually go a little bit higher. And then it breaks down in that paragraph 13, the things that it does cover, and then it breaks them down even farther. Appraisal and required repairs. So this is what does have a tendency to eat up the majority of that if there's no well or septic. Any repairs that come back conditional to the appraisal, we're going to go ahead and have them done. And it's a good idea to throw that on an addendum and have all parties sign off, because a verbal saying that from the seller's agent that the seller is going to fix those things, they're going to be charged for the appraiser to come back out. And I just feel it makes everything stronger if it's written and signed off on that the seller will in fact do those things. Because every time the appraiser has to go out, I want to say that it's usually about $125 for a re-inspect. There are some appraisers who, if you ask them nicely, if you can send a picture of something that came back as a conditional repair to the appraisal, but usually those are for things that are quite large. A perfect example of that is appraisers have a tendency to accept a photo instead of charging a re-inspect of a new roof, because a new roof compared to a picture, usually of an old roof, a bad roof, a leaking roof, or whatever, is pretty obvious. You can't guarantee that they're going to accept the picture, but you can certainly try. So we come down here too. Let's talk about moisture and termite. So typically here we see that the buyer is choosing and buyer is paying, except of course, if this is a VA loan, buyer will choose, seller must actually pay. I make that very clear when I'm having a conversation with a seller, that that's how the cookie crumbles. And sometimes it might even encourage a seller to go ahead and get a moisture and termite inspection done, say the week before, 2 weeks before the listing goes live, in preparation for that. It's not a bad idea, but we cannot guarantee that the buyer's not going to want to go ahead and get their own anyway. They don't have to accept ours, but obviously that's something I like to put in the listing, is current moisture and termite inspection with the date on it. And then if that is the case, or if, say, it's a condo, especially in a resort area, a lot of times this whole section can be waived. And in that case, we just put a strike through this entire section. Coming down here to the section that says dwelling, garage, and following additional structures. Does anybody have any ideas of what might classify as additional structures that they might want to throw into the mix here? So we can do a shed, whether permanent or semi-permanent. And if the shed was a major reason why your buyers were attracted to this house, say specifically there wasn't a garage, but there is a shed, that has a tendency to make a lot of buyers happy. But we really need to actually include that shed in the inspection to find out if there's any kind of termites, because we know that termites just love wood and most sheds are wood. So that's something that we could add there. You could also add, if you wanted to, inspect a gazebo or a pergola, or even a carport. But the important thing is that if it's not listed here as an additional place that the moisture and termite inspector would take a look at, then there's absolutely no way that a buyer can turn around and say, hey, we want this remediated. Say if there is a mold issue in a shed. Well, you didn't state in here that you were doing that. So just cover all bases, any single thing that is on the specifically in exterior. But also I want you to think about any permits that you might see on a property and you don't know whether or not it was, any additions, but you don't know whether or not they were properly permitted. You want to still go ahead if it's attached to the house and make sure that that is inspected by the moisture and termite inspector. Coming down here for this section, reports must be obtained and delivered to settlement agent. This falls under the category of the same as the home inspection. Period. So if you've got 7 days, you want to get that over to them within 7 days. Not to say that any work or remediation needs to be done in that time, but 7 days after ratification, if that's what it also says on the PICA. If it says 10 days, go with 10 days. If it says 5 days, go with 5 days. Just make those consistent. And then for an additional charge, so say, for example, somebody didn't turn over reports in that specific time frame, and the other party now needs to very quickly get a moisture and termite done, they can ask to be reimbursed the cost of that if the other side never turned it over to them. And just to make this clean, not to exceed, I usually put in here 100 or 110. Our moisture and termite reports, depending on the company, are running between 75 and 95. If it's higher, make this a little higher. Let's come on down here to treatment if required. So this is something that does cause a lot of people to have interesting conversations. The company that is doing the reports must be the company that issues, the company that is doing any work must be the company to then issue a clear report. So if you got an inspection by company A, but you decide to use company B to do the work, it must be company B that issues a clear letter. Plain and simple, no way around it. Through the treatment part. In work-like manner, and any invoice and repair documentation gets sent to both sides, as well as, very importantly, both title companies. Anything that has to do with a dollar payment, whatever the payment is, goes to title company. All right. And then this one last section I just want to touch on here. If it's written that the company that is going to do any of the repairs is the seller's choice, the buyers reserve the right to have required repairs re-inspected at or prior to walkthrough. I feel strongly that this one, once you've been told that whatever work has been remediated or done specific to moisture and termite, go ahead and get that reinspection done before the final walkthrough. Anything that can be done before final walkthrough that has to do with repairs, it just makes everybody's life easier, because God forbid something wasn't done and now we're not moving closing. So if you've been told a week before that something has already been repaired, get in there, take a look, ask for pictures. You can even ask for pictures from the inspection company, but if you want to lay eyes on it, it's always best not necessarily to wait till the walkthrough. Or some schools of thought are actually 2 separate walkthroughs. I know a lot of agents that do that. I've done that on certain properties, because if there's been a lot of repairs that need to be done, we want to give them time just to make sure they were done properly. We can't control vendors, unfortunately. I wish we could. Drinking water and septic. This is relatively self-explanatory about whether or not the buyer is going to choose at seller's expense. That's typically what we're seeing. And then any repairs that need to be done fall under the cap for the seller to repair. Same with septic. And then whether or not the property needs to be pumped is at the expense of the party that, as it says above, is if the expense falls to. Sorry, I'm dealing with a computer that's not mine. All right, walkthrough inspection. So this typically we see marked that the seller will cover any utilities for the inspection. I have seen cases where that doesn't happen, and it's typically when we have a foreclosure or a short sale. In a situation like that, oftentimes we will see where the seller has all utilities turned off. They will not be convinced to turn them back on. So a lot of times the buyer ends up putting the utilities in their name for the walkthrough, but even earlier than that, to do a home inspection. And you can talk to the utility companies about having them put into your name, and then something falls apart, you immediately remind the buyer, call the utility company and have that canceled. But that's typically only when we see the buyer paying for any utilities for inspection. Now, what I want to talk about here is something that I have seen happen a lot, right? Closing dates get moved. They have that cushion of 10 days if it's due to lender and title issues. But there's a little bit more responsibility that falls on us. And that number one thing is that if a moving gets closed, even by 1 day, you need to get the seller to not have the utilities turned off on the original day of closing. So what I will tell my sellers is go ahead and leave them on for 3 to 4 days. And that way, if they do forget and the closing has been pushed back, we're covered. But what I like to include is I will let you know once it's confirmed that the buyers have put the utilities in their name. If there's overlap, you're going to be issued a check by the utility company. Just make sure they have your new address. Usually takes about 45 days. And at that point, we're talking about dollars. But it is always the best thing for the seller to wait a couple days before turning that off. And then I'm going to talk about what happens when they don't. So I had a situation a couple of years ago where our closing got moved by 1 day. So we went to do the walkthrough on the day that the closing was actually scheduled. I show up at the property and everything is off. Water is off, gas is off, electric is off. And because the electric was turned off and the refrigerator had the ice and the water in the door, what ended up happening is that the ice melts, or the water, I guess the ice melted and the entire kitchen floor was covered with water. And while I was 99% sure that it happened because of the utility situation, you can never be sure of what's behind the walls. So I called, we said, we're going to do another walkthrough tomorrow. If they can get this remedied tonight, got a plumber out there, also brought a cleaner out there. But these are all little headaches that absolutely could have been avoided if we're paying attention. So anytime it comes to a closing being delayed, I don't care if it's 1 day, the next conversation needs to be with both sides about the utilities. Any questions about that?
Nope.
Cool. Contingencies, always fun. Get my notes here. Okay. So a few different contingencies, and the contingency, anything that is labeled a contingency has to do with a timeline. It's the easiest way for us to explain it to our clients. And I highly recommend that you do, typically in a buyer consultation or a buyer brokerage agreement, you go through the process of the transaction. Even though they might say that they're looking for a single family home, no HOA, no condo fees, when you're going through the contract, it's still a good idea to point these things out because they could become a situation where, say, buyers end up falling in love with something that has an HOA. So this will all come into play. So we're going to mark here whether or not it's a resale of a condo. And for the buttons here, the little check boxes here, that's for a condo of 4 units or above specifically. And then for the buyer's agent, you want to verify what the actual condo fee is. Mandatory monthly fees. Condo fees change. So for example, I was writing up an offer recently and I went to find out what the condo fee was, and what the listing agent told me and what was in the MLS was actually not accurate. I went onto the website for the condo association, take the extra 5 minutes and do it so you get this number right. I like to kind of get ahead of anything that could lead to disappointment with clients. And here's one way that we can take care of that. And we come on down here. There are the contingency here, and it's also, we're going to review it again later because this falls under HOA and POA and condo.
Yeah. If we write down in the contract the wrong number for the condo fees,
Yep.
And then we realize it's another number.
Yep.
The way we have to fix it is with an addendum.
It depends where in the transaction you are. If you're not ratified yet, you can fix it here.
Yes, but
So
if it's already ratified.
If it's already ratified, you can throw it onto an addendum. But at the end of the day, we can't the buyer's always going to be responsible for paying the current fee. That's nothing that we can effectively change, but you can just change it with an addendum. Okay. Yep. All right. So upon everyone receiving, and when I say everyone, buyer's agent, buyer specifically, but the buyer's agent obviously has a hand with making sure that the buyers receive the condo documents. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to send them out a document that's the acknowledgement of receipt. And we'll go through that in some of my classes later this year. But that states that they have 3 days from the day that they have received to read the condo documents and if they want to cancel as a result of. And this is important. So remember in real estate, right? The days begin at midnight. So say somebody gets condo documents today, let's just say today. And this is not business days, this is days, period. Business days don't include the weekend, but this does. So if we get the condo documents today, technically, the buyers actually to have until midnight on Monday to review and cancel if they need to. If they're not interested in canceling, nothing needs to be done whatsoever. The days just pass. But if they do want to back out because of something in the condo documents, that paperwork needs to be passed by the end of Monday of the 3rd day. Now, the language in here, I kind of think that might change in the next couple of years, but we'll see. There's 4 specific ways that a notice of cancellation can be delivered. And we want to be very clear about how and when and timestamps and things like that. So hand delivery, a little bit old school, kind of back when the purchase agreement itself was on 3 pages of carbon copy. United States mail, electronic delivery, and then the last one is overnighted. I have seen overnighted, but pretty much 99% of the time we're doing electronic copies. I'm sorry, electronic notice of cancellation. And the reason is because pretty much in all of the signing systems at this point, when we send something like in brokerment, we can look at activity, it is time-stamped, but you want to take it a step further. I hate to say to cover your ass, but to cover your ass, the moment you send that out, you want to text that agent. You want to call that agent. You want to follow it with another email so that the timing of when you have sent that and what you're looking for is for that agent to say, I've seen it or received. If we're getting to where you're not hearing anything and you feel like potentially you're being ghosted, you can send it to the broker. You want to talk to your broker, and you want to make sure that all brokers have seen when you sent it and when you followed up with email, text, and phone call. Any questions about that one? Cool. All right, we do have a decent amount of condos in the area that are 3 or fewer units. What we see a lot here, specifically, I would say in Shadow Lawn, is the 2-unit condos. Most of the time, they don't have condo documents. They don't have anything set in stone. A lot of times you might even find that you're talking to a seller's agent and there was a verbal agreement about who would cover what, about splitting the cost of a new roof, about things like cleaning gutters. You want to get those conversations going as soon as you can. Property Owners Association, I call this the baby condo fee. This is typically when properties have a pool, a clubhouse, parks, maybe even snow removal. This is not a condo fee that is going to cover your master insurance policy. That's part of the condo fee. And typically in a property owners association, we don't see them ever cover things like sewer, trash removal, or water. So typically these usually run between 25 and I've seen them go as high as 70. But again, if there's a gym involved, if there's a pool involved, et cetera, that's where we see that. There are a lot of properties in our region that have both a condo fee and a POA fee. Don't be scared of that. But it is absolutely something that we do see commonly here, and they'll even have different management companies. So what's important about that, and again, speaking from experience, I had a deal, it was in Suffolk in summer of 2021, I'll never forget it. Day of closing, the title company discovered that it wasn't just a condo fee, that there was also a property owners association. And because of that, we were able to get the documents that day on a rush, but we actually had to delay closing 3 days because of that built-in 3-day contingency. So never, ever want to have that feeling again. But just keep in mind, do the research to find out. This is the same verbiage here that there was for the condo documents. Cooperative, I think there's literally 4 in the area. And I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't on one. If you have, talk to the broker, find somebody in the firm who has and who can speak to what that means. All right, property inspection, waive or desire. You can waive your home inspection, but I'm just going to sit here and tell you it's never, ever a good idea. We've seen record numbers of buyers that have not necessarily waived it, but done it for informational purposes only. And then at least by doing that, by marking that they still desire it here, and then on the pickup, we still have a contingency period. We'll talk about that when we get into PICA and PICRA documents. It's just always a good idea to do it. At the end of the day, it is teaching you about your health and safety of this home that you are now going to be living in. All right, we're coming down here to EFIS. This is stucco. And if a client of mine is buying a house that is stucco, I will never, ever waive this inspection because you cannot see the damage to the naked eye most of the time. Now, an EFIS inspection is going to run your client, I want to say between $1,800 and $2,200. I'm going to check with Jordan and see if she or anybody else has seen it more than that. But the issue with stucco is if the tiniest bit of moisture gets in there in the interior of the exterior wall, it can grow exponentially and it can do incredible damage to the property. So you definitely want to make sure that you have that inspection done. Luckily, we don't see an overwhelming amount of stucco homes in the area. I think they have figured it out, but I'm going to tell you, I was driving in Sandbridge the other day and there were 3 or 4 new homes that were going up that were EFIS, and I was quite surprised. So just be cognizant and warn your clients appropriately. closer you are to the body of water, the closer there is a chance to being a problem. All right. So something here. Other inspections. I find this very important. There's quite a few different inspections that can be done to a property, but always property specific, right? So what could potentially make you want to bring in and do another inspection? For me personally, I know a lot of these homes that are built on slab between late 70s and early 90s have some pipe problems, different types of pipe problems. We don't need to be specific about what kind of pipe problems we're looking for, but I can tell you I've run into situations with Quest and polybutylene, and we'll go through that. But also there's a considerable amount of cast iron. And the problem with that is that they have a tendency to erode on the inside of the pipe, especially if pet hair seems to be something that really clumps and it gets stuck to the inside of the pipe, and you can have potentially a really large problem. And it always seems to happen within 30 days of a buyer moving in. So there are plumbers out there, they'll charge you between $250 and $300 to come out and do what they call scope the lines. So throw a camera into the lines under the property, and you want them to do it from the street water turnoff all the way inside. Now, I know that there are at least 2 home inspection companies that do it from the street to the house as part of their home inspection, but not actually in the slab under the property. So this is why it's important. Tell your clients in your buyer broker, in your buyer consultation, that if they do decide to go with a house on slab, you would like them to consider, depending on the age of the home, bringing in a plumber, and you're going to want to schedule that for the same time as the home inspection. You really need to make sure that you have this checked here, because otherwise a listing agent can say, I don't think so, it wasn't marked. All right. Let's get to other contingencies. So there's a couple different things that you can put in here to be contingent upon. I want to see if anybody has any ideas of what these might be. Have you ever filled out something that would go into other contingencies?
Yeah. Things like geez, no, I don't remember.
That's okay. That's okay.
I remember I have those things over there.
In there, yeah. So I would say in the last couple of years, the biggest thing that we're seeing here is that this purchase is contingent on the sale of the buyer's property.
Yes.
It's very, very important. You absolutely must disclose, unless your buyer can afford this without using the equity or whatever from their last place, you must disclose that it is based on a home sale contingency. That's the number one thing that I think that we see there. I have also seen where people go under contract and they're not using a new construction contract, but it is a new build. Maybe even by the time you saw it, it could have been halfway done, or you see plans for it, but it's a builder who hasn't been able to release what they're offering for fixtures. Okay, you just don't want to blanket leave that out of here, because what happens if 2 months into the contract and they've released what they're offering for fixtures and your buyer doesn't like a single thing that they're offering because it's not quality, it's not this, it's not the right color, whatever. So you can actually put in here that this purchase is contingent upon receipt of a list of fixtures. And then at that point, I would actually add the verbiage that they have a 3-day contingency from receipt, that if they want to cancel as a result of the list of fixtures. The number one thing this does is it really makes the new build agents pony up that list as fast as possible. I shouldn't say as fast as possible, as fast as they can. Sometimes their hands are tied too. But I have found in my experience, a lot of times they really wait a long time before disclosing that. So you want to go ahead and put it in as a contingency issue.
About inspections.
Mhm.
For example, if I show a property, we go on the contract, and at the day of the walkthrough, the property looks different, with problems like you said, like water,
Mhm.
running in the house,
Mhm.
things like that. Will you recommend another inspection or just walk out and the
No, I don't even recommend either one of those. So you're doing the walkthrough, right? The closing is the next day or in a couple of days, and you see these problems. and they didn't look that way when you viewed the house
Yes.
and when you had the inspection,
Yes.
right? And luckily with the home inspection, there's pictures, and we have done what we're supposed to do and saved the MLS listing so that we have access to those pictures as well. First thing I do while I'm in the house is I'm calling that listing agent, because they might not know that there's a problem. So give them the benefit of the doubt. Hey, this is what I'm seeing. And that listing agent, if I was a listing agent, I would say, oh my God, FaceTime me, or send me pictures of what you're talking about. They call the seller. These things need to be done
Yes.
before closing.
Correct.
So if your closing is the next day, you're going to negotiate with the listing agent when your new closing day is. Plain and simple. It is absolutely not a reason to walk away. If your buyer says they want to walk away, we have to talk about that, because we're days away from closing. Do they want to start the whole thing over again? They lose any money that they paid to a third-party vendor. So inspection, appraisal, that money is gone. And if they cancel due to that, they're going to lose their EMD. So let's give the seller the benefit of the doubt to get it fixed. And then we do another walkthrough. Does that make sense, guys? Andrew and Rachel?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Yes, yep.
All right, so we come down to one of my favorite sections, items to convey. I spend more time here on a contract than almost any other place in the contract, because not checking things here, not to scare anybody, can lead to court. So we want to be very careful about what we're asking for. For example, refrigerator. How many times do you go and you view a property and there's a refrigerator in the garage? And there's nothing in the listing that says refrigerator in garage does not convey. So obviously you talk to your buyer, oh my God, they totally want that refrigerator as well as the one inside. You're going to go ahead and mark 2 refrigerators. If you don't, you have no claim to that refrigerator that's in the garage. Just pick up the phone and have a conversation with the listing agent. Hey, were they planning on taking it? Because my gosh, my buyers would really love it. The other thing I want to let people know is that I have seen some shisty business where people will actually swap out that garage refrigerator for the really nice Samsung one inside. So we can use verbiage that says, and I do this in my additional notes every time, appliances to convey as they were on the day of showing, period. And that takes any possible mediation or court case out of the picture. So we want to mark everything with microwave oven. Some of them are sitting on the countertop and they're not actually attached. It's one of the questions you want to ask the listing agent, because even though our microwave oven is really cheap these days and we don't have a problem running out and spending $100 for a nice new one for our clients, why would we want to do that just because we didn't check a box? So dishwasher, ice maker, freezer, traditionally we see these in my garage as well. Clothes dryer and clothes washer, these are specifically the things that I have seen lead to court. You want to follow number 1, look very closely at the verbiage in the listing. And then if it says convey or not convey, go ahead and verify that anyway with the listing agent. A little bit of extra work keeps everybody happy. Garage disposal. When I am showing, I have a separate list of things that's on my mind that I'm looking at while my clients are running around thinking about how much they love the house. And the number 1 thing is garbage disposal. Again, it's something that, God forbid, if we mark and then they don't have one, we can buy for our clients. But again, you don't want to have to do that. Coming down to windows and blinds, curtains, drapes, and hardware. I always mark blinds and hardware. A lot of times people will leave curtains and drapes because they're custom to that property. Have that conversation with the listing agent to find out. But you always want to check blinds. If there are blinds, take a look at the pictures. If you can't remember, go back into the MLS listing when you're writing up the contract and take a look if there are blinds. But to not check it and then have sellers take it. Your buyers move in on night 1 and they have no blinds. I had it happen to me. It was awful. It happens. And nobody wants the first night in their home to have no blinds. All right.
not only that, after all those expenses, probably they don't have money
Exactly.
to.
Right.
Buy all that
Our
stuff.
goal is to put people into a house, not cash for it.
Yes.
And submitted this and you're ratified and you didn't mark it, you can come back and ask for it, but they do not have to say, oh, I'm unstable. Let's make that go away. Okay. So smoke alarms and ceiling fans are two other things like the garbage disposal that when I walk into a showing, I'm counting. Yes, you can write all. It doesn't show your attention to detail. And the reality is you're showing the attention to detail both to your buyer and to the listing agent. So go ahead and count them. Specifically with the ceiling fans, because I have seen people take them. So ceiling fans are another thing that you can add on when we're going to come down to the additional notes and write things like appliances to convey as they were on the day of showing. You can also write that about the ceiling fans. Say you're in this fabulous house and they have these incredible, gorgeous ceiling fans and your buyer won't stop talking about them. You also need to make sure that you're getting the ceiling fan that was there the day of showing.
What I have seen is they changed an expensive chandelier.
Yes, all the time. All the time. That's why there's the box for the additional notes. It's tedious, but it is so worth it. If I have sellers who have something in their house that they want to take with them, that could be deemed cosmetic even, I want them to actually remove it before we show.
Of course.
Yep, absolutely. We're not going to show something that's absolutely gorgeous if they plan on taking it with them. All right. Oops. Trash container, recycling container. There are some condo communities that don't recycle. Have that conversation with the listing agent and find out. Obviously, when you're actually showing a property, I do try to lay my eyes on the trash and recycling. It's not the end of the day. If your clients need to order one through the city, they can. It usually runs about $75 to replace it. Garage door opener and remotes, something else that I will count. I want to make sure it's actually in working order even the day of showing. It could be problematic because if it breaks due to something you did, you can be liable. So you really kind of need to gauge that. I gauge it based on whether or not my clients are really excited about the garage. And then the remotes, I tell my sellers, leave the remotes out on the counter during the home inspection, so that the sellers, the buyer's home inspector can even see them as well and test them. We want to give the opportunity for everything that's working. Obviously with the dock and the hot tub, any kind of equipment or cover that you see at the showing, including pool and hot tub, you definitely want to make sure that you've marked these, and they can be something else to be included when you come to additional notes saying how it's to be conveyed in order it was at the showing. Fireplace, obviously, we're not just going to mark fireplace. You want to make sure you know whether or not it's wood burning or gas. Ask for the equipment, ask for the doors, ask for the screen, ask for all of it, because a buyer's going to come in there and be like, I don't know what I'm doing. And all of a sudden they're Googling how to take care of their fireplace. It'd be really nice if they actually have the equipment that they need. Makes life easier. Okay, so coming to... Yeah, so the verbiage I have a tendency to use here is any and all items in the house on the day of showing shall convey. You can work out your own language, and Lucy will also pay attention to what you say, and she'll correct you and always go with what she says. Okay. Confirmations and disclosures. This is stating that we have given them all documents, all disclosures that they need before signing this. This has to do with any ACUs, any lead, and then we're signing the document saying that we've seen all the other disclosures, so that you can explain to your clients this DPOR document is just confirm, it's a confirmation that you have seen all the other disclosures. Cannot be missed. And then we have this little blurb here. I like to see this in bold. This is our hold harmless. As long as we have made sure that they have seen all of the disclosures, we are not held responsible.
Can we be in trouble if we, a buyer sign all those disclosures and then they say we don't speak English? I think that's
a really interesting question. That's a really interesting question.
Then that must be the responsibility.
I've
because if they
never had
don't-
to deal with that. I do believe that for Spanish, there are Spanish copies of this in range.
What if they say
But it could be, yeah, no, that's actually a really good question. Let's make a note of that and find out if
But
we're
at the same
liable or
time-
not. Because I had somebody a couple years ago who she made it clear that English was not her first language, but she knew some, but she had an app on her phone that translated the whole thing, like it was a scanning app.
Yes.
So she scanned the document and it totally translated. Now, could there be something lost in translation? Absolutely. But I want to ask Lucy.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think if you don't understand why you design the document. You know
Right,
what I mean?
absolutely.
You don't know what you're signing, why you.
Exactly.
move forward
And I
with
do
it.
think that that's problematic.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's find out. And then we can bring that up. It's not the broker. That's a great question. Confirmation of brokerage relationship. So in real estate, relationship and agency are terms that are a little bit redundant with each other. I like to have the conversation with whoever I'm representing, be it seller or buyer, very specifically what that means, because a lot of times people will think, oh, they're hiring you. They're actually entering into a relationship with the firm, depending on the type of representation. And what this part down here does is it breaks down the different type of representation. Some of these representations we don't even do here at this firm. They leave us open to incredible lawsuits. So we don't do that. Traditionally, most that we're doing, I would say 90% are number two, where each side has their own representation. If the buyer is unrepresented and you are representing the seller as a customer, the seller as your client, but the buyer is a customer, then you're going to put forth a disclosure of brokerage relationship to unrepresented party and discuss with them. You're representing the other side. You cannot negotiate on their behalf, only the people who have hired you and are your clients. Okay. This one states that the buyer is represented. We see this a lot with FSBOs. So the buyer is represented, the seller is not. We're going to put forth that same document. And then we just need to be really careful because a lot of times FSBOs or sellers who are unrepresented will try to lean on us for information. I got my hand slapped pretty hard. I think it was my second year in from Cindy because I was really just trying to be nice. And answering people's questions is a nice thing to do, but it could have put the entire transaction in jeopardy. So I really had to kind of step back and tell them that I'm not representing them, nor could I give them any information that was not public, and that they needed to seek out their own representation. And I recommended they go ahead and hire a real estate attorney. And that's the end of the conversation with them. We need to be very careful. Okay, this number 5 is dual agency. We don't do that. Plain and simple at this firm. It absolutely handcuffs us from being able to represent anybody's best interest. Can't really do any negotiating. So designated agent, we do see. So say, for example, I have picked up a seller and I'm going to list their property and I have a buyer who this property is everything they want. I'm going to find an agent in coastal town to represent the buyers, even though I might have had a friendly relationship with them. Here's where it gets tricky. If you have already signed a buyer agreement and you think that the buyers want that property and the sellers have tasked you with wanting you to list it, you actually need to, the best practice is to give that listing to another agent because you already have an agreement with the buyers. The buyers already believe you're their agent. You can't really drop them.
So in that case, I can refer that person only for that property.
Correct.
So I don't lose the client because otherwise the client
Absolutely.
is going to keep going with the other agent.
Absolutely. So you can refer that listing. Now, if somebody wants you to list their property and you don't have a signed agreement with a buyer, but you know of a buyer in your database that this would be everything that they're looking for, you're going to reach out to that buyer and you're going to say, look, I have this listing, but I don't practice dual agency. I don't find I can represent you best if I'm representing both sides. So I have an agent that I've worked with for years, yada, yada, pump them up, that will absolutely take care of you. And they're going to call you this afternoon.
For that property.
So that property.
If he doesn't or she doesn't buy that property, then that is still your client.
But you have, I'm talking about if you haven't had a buyer broker sign. You're talking about if you have had a buyer broker sign, then you can't drop them or give them to somebody else for that property. It means you shouldn't take that listing.
It makes sense.
Yep. Now, there are occasions, and I don't tout this as a good way to go. There are occasions where, like, for example, I went on a FISBO appointment, but I honestly went because I thought I have these buyers I've been working with for 3 years. This is the perfect property for them. It's the neighborhood they want. Everything is exactly like what they want, and the price is perfect. So I just went and talked to them, and I was nice to them. I did not try to get them to hire me as the listing agent. I very purposefully said, I have an agreement and my friends, et cetera. So I need to double check on my buyer brokerage agreement and see if it's still current. It wasn't expired. So I had to go back to the sellers and say, I can't represent you because I do have a signed agreement, legally binding agreement with these buyers. They didn't want to hire a real estate attorney. They didn't want to hire somebody to help them with paperwork. So for 4%, they're paying me the 3% to represent the buyers and that additional 1% to help them with admin duties, to help them only with paperwork. And I went over and I made it very clear, I am not representing you. I cannot give you advice, and I can only negotiate on the behalf of my buyers. So it's tricky. It is very tricky because then she told a neighbor about me and that I put their house on the market. I did not. It's not even on the market. It's not hitting the MLS. So when I heard that from the neighbor, I immediately called her and was like, hey, I need to make sure we are very clear. You signed this document, they signed like 5 documents stating that I don't represent them. And I said, just to keep everything above board, I don't want you to think I'm representing. And she was like, no, I totally misspoke. But it can get really tricky. It can get really tricky as far as what I offer them. Another thing I ran into by doing the paperwork for the buyer, but a little bit of paperwork for the seller, representing the buyer, a little bit of paperwork for the seller, is that I sent all of this over to Jones, Walker, and Lee. They won't. They're allowed to, but they won't represent both sides.
Yes.
So they called me within 5 seconds of getting the contract and said, you got to tell them to go somewhere else. So I did give them a list of other settlement companies, including ones that do have lawyers. But I couldn't do anything more than that.
Yeah, that's their choice.
Exactly. That's their choice. I could tell them who I've worked with, and I've worked with all of those other settlement companies. So, but I didn't even, there are things that didn't even occur to me. So I know that I have a tendency to talk a lot, and I know that we are running out of time. Andrew and Rachel, do you guys want me to continue? Because I can.
Yeah, I have time.
Okay. Andrew?
I've got a little bit of time.
Cool. If you guys need to bounce, I understand.
Okay.
All right.
Baby's asleep. We're good.
Okay, cool. All right. So that's the breakdown here. This last one, buyer and seller acknowledge that no brokerage relationship exists. We're basically being hired to do paperwork. You're not representing either side. It's a limited service, and I'm pretty sure, we'll double check. I'm pretty sure that I've heard in the last 2 weeks that we don't really like to do that either at this firm. It's just a major time suck for you to take a very small fee, usually under 500, just to list it and handle paperwork. There's no way to not negotiate, literally none. So that's always a bit of an issue. So the majority of what we see is number 2 and number 6, designated agency. Dual agency probably won't see because we don't do that at our firm. And if it's dual agency, it's all the same agent. Okay, let's come down and talk about ACUs, aircraft noise, and accident potential. These are all very easy to find, all of this information. It's also attached to the tax records. It's on Listings, it should absolutely be in the listing, but I will tell you about 25% of the time, the listing agent has it wrong. So double check. You can do that by going into some of the properties that have sold recently. You can call other listing agents that have sold in the area, but you want to verify that. I had a situation where, I mean, we weren't under contract before we figured it out, but it was in a much different zone that was originally listed. And that's a RAIN violation. So we want to make sure for our purposes that we are right and not rely on the seller side for proper information. I mean, that's what it comes down to in a buyer beware state that we're in. So the number is going to range from anywhere of a -65 to a 75 plus. Areas that have a 75 plus, say around Oceana, is definitely a 75 plus because of the jets taking off, and then a clear line over pretty much over the north end is 75 plus. The noise is really loud, and it's not just the decibels that comes into factor here. I just learned this recently, actually, from Jordan, that it's also the frequency. So for example, I live in a 70 to 75 ACUs, and there's a little tiny condo association or condo little development between me and Dam Neck. So I would have absolutely assumed they were in the same ACUs, but the way they're positioned, even though they're less than a mile from my house, the way the condo is development is positioned outside of Dam Neck, they're in a -65. And when I asked them about it, they said they barely hear anything, which was absolutely unbelievable. I was about to write it as if it was the same as mine because I figured the neighborhoods are next to each other, but nope. So again, with everything, do your due diligence. All right. So let's talk about the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act. This is tough because we are a buyer beware state. We ask sellers to disclose to buyers certain information known to the sellers regarding condition of the property to be purchased. What they're looking for you to disclose, not held accountable, but looking for you to disclose is what we call a latent defect. So we have latent defects and we have patent defects. A latent defect is anything that's not obvious to the eye. This comes into consideration with a home inspection. There are absolutely things that a home inspector might not see. So if a seller is fully aware that they have a major foundation issue, let's talk about it. Let's disclose. They might not want to disclose if it's a minor issue, but if it's a major issue, it can really be a problem if they don't. And the buyer and seller, the important thing is they're acknowledging the property disclosure statement, if attached, has been provided by seller. And that's a document that we would add if they were to disclose. We don't see it a lot, just typically because we do have places on all of our contracts that say buyer beware. It doesn't let the seller off scot-free if they know something. And actually, I think I took a screenshot. Let me see something here. Yep. I wanted to talk a little bit about the definition of latent defect. Okay. So a latent defect is a fault in the property that could not have been discovered by a reasonably thorough inspection before the sale. So the general law of sale of property in this state is buyer beware, also known as caveat emptor. The buyers are really carrying the responsibility of finding out everything that they can before closing. We want to help them with that. We're not trying to hinder anything. So if the seller says to you, I want to hide something, that's a major red flag, and we need to talk about why they shouldn't. A deal will fall apart is the biggest reason. You might be able to get somebody under contract, but they're going to find a way out. And that's why we have a home inspection contingency. Okay. Agency interest disclosure. This is basically just if you are related or will benefit from any part of the transaction or any contacts in the transaction, you need to disclose. And I personally believe that you need to overly disclose. For example, you're in a long-term relationship and it's your boyfriend's property, go ahead and disclose that. It's just better, keep everything above board, disclose as much as you possibly can. If you don't disclose and you get dinged, you're in trouble. If you do disclose, there's no recourse. Okay. Megan's Law disclosure. This is a big one. I let people know this during the buyer consultation, and it is in both the Chapter 7 and which is the summary of rights for buyers and sellers, as well as the CDIF. You never ever want to leave this off the table. You never know who's going to have any kinds of issues. And here is the website to go ahead and pass along to the buyers so that they can see if they're concerned about the neighborhood, if they have kids, for whatever reason, they're the ones who have to check that. Mechanics lien, at the end of the day, this is going to be found out by the title company if work has been done to the property and the sellers haven't paid. Now, here's an important part. A lien may be filed at any time after work is commenced or the materials furnished, but not later than 90 days. So that means that a buyer can take possession and deed in their name, and someone can still file a lien up to 90 days. So you really want to be comfortable with your title company, that they're looking at everything. Square footage, the long and short of it is that the seller can state what they believe the square footage is. As a listing agent, you want to go ahead and verify that with the tax records. If you see a difference, ask. You have a screened-in porch. Is that permitted? Has the square footage been added to the records? But at the end of the day, we can't hold a seller responsible or use a difference in square footage as a reason to cancel the contract. So, like everything else, go ahead and get the right answer before you put forth the offer as a buyer's agent and before you list it as a seller's agent. I made the mistake once of not doing that, and major embarrassment. I mean, at the end of the day, that wasn't a good look. So always verify. Pending buildings and zoning violations. Hang on one sec. Oh, I missed a couple things. Hang on one second. There was something else I wanted to do. And now my notes are not in order. We already did that. We did that. Well, I had notes, additional notes, and I think that I lost them, but pending building or zoning violations, this comes into play more so with a new build. But at the end of the day, there are different building codes, and you're, as part of your data entry document, you're going to put input how the property was zoned. And I've seen a lot of agents just put RES, and that actually doesn't cover everything residential. PUDs have a different zoning, so you want to verify what it is. And again, that comes back to the tax records. You can look at it through Realist, but I always want you to fact check what you see on Realist with going straight to the city website and the real estate assessor's office in that website. Property previously used to manufacture methamphetamine. This is something that no matter what, a seller must disclose. More than anything else, it can absolutely soak into the walls very quickly and make future homeowners very, very sick. There's remediation that needs to happen if a property has been used to make methamphetamine, and that will absolutely fall to the seller. That can become either a mediation or a court case if they don't disclose. Brokerage fee, I think everybody knows what that is. That is between agent to agent, firm to firm, not a document that even gets signed by the buyers or sellers. That is the agreement that we have as far as the commission. And this is why with our firm, it is absolutely mandatory that when you're putting forth an offer, you want to download that MLS. Back in the day, I don't know how far long ago, people would actually go into the MLS upon ratification and change what they're offering to the other side. And unless we have proof of what it said that day, yep. some shady business. I mean, a lot of the contract is built to keep us away from shady business. All right. So default. There's a couple different ways to default. If a buyer wants to pull out and we're past all contingencies, including finance contingency and appraisal contingency, or if a seller decides they don't want to sell, and again, we're past contingency. This is a very, very important paragraph. I want you to read it. I want you to feel comfortable with it. One of the things that helps me with this is just stating to them, to your clients in a buyer consult or a listing conversation, this is how we stay out of court. We stay out of default. We have opportunities for cancellation, and we have only those opportunities, because otherwise it goes to court, and I can't help a client once something goes to court. But the default is major. And the defaulting party loses the EMD. That's major. Dispute resolution. So before going to court for almost everything, this is signing off that you agree to try to go through mediation. Although there might be, what's the word I'm looking for? Good intentions. I see a lot of things kind of get pushed out of mediation. Or the biggest mistake I see with this is that once somebody has decided that there's an issue and they want to go through mediation because there's a dispute in the contract, they let the other side know, and the other side has 30 days to respond. If they don't, it goes straight to court if the first party wants it to. They have the right at that point to either not go to court or move to court. But if they don't hear anything, if there's crickets from the other side within 30 until day 31, at that point you can sue. There are a couple things in here that do not go through mediation, and that's all in these paragraphs here. What's important to know is a foreclosure does not go through mediation, and what they call detainer action. So detainer action is when you can't get a seller out. Seller stops talking to their agent, stops communicating, and is still there at day of closing. Buyers can't move in. That's a big problem. That does not get mediated because both parties haven't agreed to mediation. So that becomes what it is. And that's when you get lawyers and police involved. A mechanic's lien is not something that's mediated. Probate is not something that's mediated. And anything that has to do with a clear violation of code, of laws, code and laws being the same thing here. Other than that, anything else can be mediated. But again, if we're filling out the contract properly, if we're filling out the listing agreement properly, it really reduces any need for mediation. Mediation will take you away from your business. So let's all do the right things to not end up happening there. Okay, other provisions. This section is phenomenal because you can write in whatever you want and it becomes a part of the contract body. So things that we would see in other provisions. Do you have any thoughts about that? Rachel or Andrew, if you guys have any thoughts about what would be considered other provisions? Not a contingency. That's okay. So if somebody says they want to do a home inspection for informational purposes only, or I've even written as home inspection will be pass fail only, meaning buyer's going to do the home inspection and they either say, yes, I take the house as it is, or I walk away. I don't like that one because it actually takes away the possibility of something really good to happen, meaning, oh, hey, I know that we said we were going to do this for informational purposes only, but the home inspector said that there's a problem with the furnace. So I had a situation where I just reached out to the listing agent and said, look, home inspection went really well, except for this one major red flag. And typically it's something with a cost over $1,000. Under $1,000, I feel like buyers can handle. Over $1,000, like the furnace. So we let the other side know. Turns out the seller was more than willing because they wanted to keep the deal under contract. They had plans. They had a new purchase going on, right? And they had somebody come out to do an estimate, and it was a $700 fix. And they were more than happy to take care of it. So even though we had put forth an offer that said for home inspection purposes only, there are some negotiating tactics that we can learn to get around that. But again, not for, a ding on the tile. for major system issues. Okay, so that's where I put that. That's where I put in where we are going to ask for a home warranty and for how much. Home warranties are a super big range of costs. They run anywhere. I've seen them in this area between $450 all the way up to, I think the newest one is like a $1,200 one, but you know, they're really specific to properties, so be careful. I have the tendency here for most properties to write in seller to provide 1 year home warranty up to, and then put a total. So I usually go up to 700 unless like it's a, you know, a little condo, and then we can go lower, we can go maybe even 550 or 6. And then you also have to include the language buyer's choice of company. If I have sellers and they have an active home warranty, I'm going to ask them to go ahead and offer that to the buyer side. And if we're going to do that, we're going to put it in the listing, so we save the other agent time from having to write in here. So that's a nice thing to offer as well if you do have a seller with an existing home warranty. Also, what we saw in the last couple of years, but never saw before 2020, but it is still around, especially right now. We're in the spring buying season. We're seeing a lot more qualified buyers because the interest rate has dipped a little bit over the last 5 weeks. So things are getting a little bit more competitive right now, especially for those perfect properties. So people want to do an appraisal gap guarantee. Yes, there's an additional document that states that and everything involved, and we would attach that to the offer, not afterwards, with the offer, and it becomes part of the contract. But you still want to put in here the general terms of the appraisal gap guarantee. Plain and simple. If you're including the document to add an escalation clause, put it in here so they know to look for it. All of these things are, again, to make your offer very attractive. And a lot of times it's not just about the number, it's about the cleanliness of the offer. So doing your due diligence and putting forth an offer that makes sense is helpful, it's very helpful. So that's what I have for other provisions, but there are other things that can definitely come up in other provisions. Anything that doesn't have to, that's anything you're asking for that doesn't have to do with a contingency, because we already hit that section where we're asking for additional contingencies. Non-assignment, this agreement may not be assigned by buyer. We do not do assignments at this firm. So I'm not even going to talk anymore about that. Tax deferred exchange. If you have a seller who is using a 1031 tax exchange to take their equity from one property and put it into another property, there's a lot that goes into that conversation. But the number one first thing that you need to say to a seller or buyer who has told you they want to do that is, let's go ahead and talk to your tax preparer. They're the ones who are going to recommend. You need a third party 1031 tax exchange company that holds the money in escrow. A lender cannot, an escrow company cannot. So you need to be very clear. You can say that and then tell them to talk to their CPA. We are not certified or licensed CPAs, so I don't like speaking to this too much. And in quite a few of our Stomp the Brokers, we've had conversations about 1031 as well. All right. So notices this basically, what I like to call this an adulting item, because anything that happens goes through the agents. Plain and simple, we have the responsibility to put forth anything. It breaks it down into the 4 ways, again, that something can, a notice can be delivered. A notice, an addendum, an agreement, anything that you are putting forth in paperwork while under contract is actually a part of the contract. So these are the same 4 ways as before, with the contingencies of how do we deliver that information. And C, electronic is the majority of how things should be done at this point. We do have some older people in the area who might not be able to do electronic. They can't figure out the clicking, or they don't have 2 separate email accounts. This is the number one thing I run into. And that's why we can't always do electronic, but we want to try to make that happen. The miscellaneous in bold, this is important. The term day shall be deemed to mean any day of the week, Monday through Sunday, both inclusive regardless of legal or religious holiday. So that is 365, 64, whatever, days a year. If it says day, if it says business banking day, obviously that's Monday through Friday, except the 11 federal holidays. Where this comes into play is that every single agreement that says a day in a contingency is in our market, Monday through Sunday, every single day of the week, except for the payment for EMD. That is the only one related to business banking day. So if you're putting forth an offer on Thursday night, you've ratified on Friday morning, and then you have to get the EMD in, they have to get that EMD in by midnight on Tuesday. We don't count the weekends as days. But if it's a 3-day contingency and it starts at midnight Friday morning, that ends Sunday night. What's really important about this, or that I seem to run into in correlation with this, is that your buyer is going to receive the CD within a week of closing. Obvious, for the most part, most lenders get it to them a week out and it's an estimate and it adjusts. And then the final one comes out the day before, sometimes even that morning, depending on the lender. But they need to have one, the lender needs to have one signed a minimum of 3 days out. I have had people receive it on a Friday and think they don't need to sign it until Monday. And as a result, we had to actually push back closing by 3 days. Just learn from my mistakes. So that covers the miscellaneous. I think I skipped something. This goes into more detail, but also in detail about the digital signatures. If one party says that they're not going to do them, it doesn't mean the other party can't. We just need to have an agreement on who is and who isn't. And this is where we have them sign. And I would say my first 2 years, this is the biggest box that I totally missed. But back then we actually had to drop our initial boxes. It didn't automatically fill it. Coming down to this page, this is something I actually fill in first or try to get in as much as possible into the transaction information. It will auto-populate here, as most of my information has. Make sure you put as much as possible here, and it's not necessarily for other people to see, but ask your seller if they're comfortable with their new address being on here. Ask your buyer if they're comfortable with their address being on here. I know some people worry about like marketing and things like that. The title company needs that information anyway. So what I have done for my clients is I don't actually fill in the addresses here. I do have a separate info sheet that I send off with the contract to the title company, just to make sure, because otherwise they're going to call you, hey, I need the phone number, hey, I need their email address. Make it easy, make their job easier for them, for Ashley. And that brings us to the end of the contract.
Thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome. All right. Does anybody, Leticia, Andrew, or Rachel have any questions for me?
No, thanks. That was great. Really good information. I appreciate it.
Oh,
Yeah, no, I'm good. I took a lot of notes. It was really good.
yay.
Yeah, just I think if we make any mistakes or we have to add anything to a ratified contract, we have to write an addendum.
Once it's
whatever.
ratified.
Yeah.
You can strike through, you can make changes all you want in negotiation. But once that on the very first page, ratification box is filled out, no more changes to the document itself. It doesn't mean that something can't be renegotiated. You just do it on an addendum. And there shouldn't be any kind of a fear about putting forth an addendum. It takes 3 minutes. You've already had the conversation with the co-broke, the other agent involved in the transaction. Hey, this is something that we really need to renegotiate. And then you just
We need to say mistake.
exactly
We make
to correct the mistake. So where I see that actually come up a lot is if somebody got a buyer or seller's name wrong.
Correct.
So to correct it, you don't go back and strike through on the contract. You change it there on an addendum and you send it to all parties involved in the transaction. Absolutely. Cool. Well, thank you for staying with me a little bit longer. I have a tendency to talk.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks
All
again,
right,
Rebecca.
guys.
Have a good
Have a
weekend.
great weekend.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Bye.
Bye.
I don't know how to close this.
Don't ask me.
Okay, I think I stopped.